an incredible film, and I want to thank all of you all for sticking around for our panel. Since Reformation or Reconstruction, the possibility of black power through black electoral leadership has always been a question for our community. After slavery, we saw hundreds of black elected officials sweep the South and across the North. And there are a number of stories that arise that we can pull from to inform our decisions around whether an electoral strategy is one that we need to engage in as people seeking to be free and citizens of this country. On one side, and there's much nuance, but on one side you have the great stories, the stories like the one we saw that wasn't without struggle, wasn't without obstacles, but one that highlighted the successes of people who stood up, who came from the movement and sought to use elected office as a pulpit for liberation for our people. On the other side, you have the stories of mayors and sheriffs who were woefully incapable of ensuring that its city's citizens, especially its most marginalized, its black, its poor, are taken care of. And we've also seen across the country by many metrics that no matter how many black elected officials that we've had, the state of black America is in many ways the same as it always has been or worse. I come from the city of Chicago. We had a black mayor for 4 years before they murdered him. And you could see that it takes a lot to shift the gears of a huge industrial city. And so today we actually are honored to have people who have stood up and taken on the mantle of black political leadership for our community in this city. Before we go fully into it, I want to introduce myself. My name is Phillip Agnew. I've lived in this city for 6 years. I lived in Miami North, Florida A&M University for 5 years. And if you ain't go there, you don't get it. It's okay though, but it prepared me for this move. And I'm proud to be a member, a co-director, an outgoing co-director of an organization that I helped start called the Dream Defenders. We're often called too radical, but what I would challenge you all to do is see what we stand for, and that's in the booklets that you all have been handed out. We stand for water, for food, for shelter, for healthcare, education, for all people. And we think that a city and a state that is run with people first and not profit first can actually build the things that we need. We believe that Florida can not always be a playground for the rich, but can also be a place where families are able to make ends meet without parents having to work 3 and 4 jobs, where formerly incarcerated people can not only vote as they will after November, but can also run for office. We have an illustrious panel that needs no introduction, but they're going to introduce themselves. And so you'll each have 2 minutes to introduce yourself. And if you can, in that introduction, please just talk about, for folks who may not know, I know a lot of people who don't get engaged, as I said before, in the political process. Please explain what your position does and why you decided to run for that position.
I am Dorothy Ruth Bendross-Mindingall, a little girl from Overtown, Liberty City, Railroad Shop, and I guess you would say I ran because I was told to run. So, as a school principal, I worked in the area of Scott Carver projects, and the people there didn't know their value or their worth. So having children whose homes did not always have the daddies there, and I say that because anyone could be a father, but you got to be kind of strong to be a daddy. So they would not come to school. Why? Because they had to get their new clothes for the school year. Well, I told them as I entered into my principalship, if they don't come to school, I'm coming to get them. They did the same thing that I heard over here. They chuckled. Well, they did not know that I was a project kid also. So I had to challenge them, and they challenged me right back. So I walked across the street the first day of school because half of the children did not come. And the other part of the story, since I did that, would lead me to running. How did that happen? There was a family, there is a family, the Meek family, Carol Meek. And she said, what you're doing out there at that school, hiring parents, making them get educated, on and on. You can do that for a community. You can do it for the state. So they encouraged me to run for state representative. I'd never run for office. I ran with 9 people, and I won. And so after that, I was sort of like Maynard. Keep running, you hear that? Keep running quickly. After I did my 8 years Tallahassee, I came home and ran for the school board, and I just won my re-election August 28th. So it's a long story. It's a book long, probably a movie. Thank you very much.
My name is Oliver Gilbert. I'm the mayor of Miami Gardens. This is actually my first boss. So I was her first legislative aide when she ran for the state house. Yeah. So I have no doubt that if that wasn't my first job out of law school, I would not have gone into public service. I would not have done that. I went to law school to be a litigator. That was legitimate in my plan. I was going to make a lot of money as a lawyer, and that is in fact what I was doing. So her planting the seeds of service in a lot of ways, and Miami Gardens becoming a city. So when I grew up there, it was all these little neighborhoods and blocks, and I grew up in the Bajas and, went to Norland, and we all knew each other, but we were not a city. Miami Gardens becoming a city, and understanding, learning service from her, and then having an imagination about, there was something in the film that talked about you don't have to be crazy to be a mayor. And it's interesting because I've heard Dan Halprin say that to me before, the guy who actually is in the film, because he's working on development in Miami Gardens. And I understand where he got it from now. And what he's just saying is, crazy is just imagining something different and figuring that you can probably make it happen. That's what he was, so when he says it to me, it actually, I was sitting there and it carried a little more meaning because now I understand what he's talking about. So, but that's why I ran for office. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dotie Joseph. For the phonetically inclined, that's Dotie Joseph, because I was born in Haiti, raised right here, came here when I was 3. My dad's a pastor, my mommy's a nurse. So you could say I was literally born into a life of service, not necessarily public service. Grew up in this area, went to Lakeview, Charles Drew Elementary, then Miami Norland for middle school, graduated from DAS, Design and Architecture Senior High, went to American, HML, and Carroll City. Yep, all of that on the summers. Studied hard, so proud product of Miami-Dade Public Schools, Yale undergrad. While I was there, I interned with Congressman Peter Deutsch in his district office in I think Broward, and I decided I did not like politics. He invited me up to, they liked my work so much, they invited me up to go work in Washington, D.C., saw how the sausage was made, and I was like, this is not for me. So I ran away from it. Then after I graduated, I worked with President Jimmy Carter in Atlanta doing democracy development work, focusing on Latin America, the Caribbean, and West Africa. And I was like, this is for me. I could be in the background, be like a track 2 diplomat, make sure we don't go to war, and nobody needs to know I exist. But then all of my mentors are like, listen, you're passionate about civil rights and human rights, you need to go to law school. I had decided I didn't want to become a lawyer because while I was in high school, I interned with the Miami-Dade Public Defender's Office, and I didn't like how the criminal justice system works. And I thought it was very unfair. People that looked like us were going to jail, and they just needed some medical attention. It's very different now with the opioid epidemic, but back then it wasn't so nice. Anyway, I sucked it up, and I went to law school, went to Georgetown Law. I actually went to Georgetown with Valerie, who you saw in the movie, and became a civil rights attorney. Studied hard. Once I graduated, I did civil rights law, mostly employment discrimination class actions all around the United States. Some went to the Supreme Court. and I unapologetically kicked butt. Then came back home to serve, became the first black attorney ever to work at the city of North Miami Beach, assistant deputy and interim city attorney. Then became first vice chair of the Miami-Dade Democratic Party. And here's how I decided to run for office. I didn't want to. At the end of 2015, I was involved in not one, not two, but 3 car accidents, none of which were my fault, and I still suffer from some injuries to this day. But it slowed me down long enough for me to realize I could and should be doing more. So much to my parents' chagrin, I walked away from a lot of money to run for office for Florida House District 108, the district in which I grew up, to serve, because I didn't like what was going down. And now I'm the Democratic nominee. There you go.
Making sure everyone gets their just desserts for applause and everything. Good evening. I'm Senator Dwight Bullard. I get to keep the title for the rest of my life. It's that plus $1.50 will get me an iced coffee. But I had the pleasure of serving in the Florida House and Florida Senate for 8 years, representing areas down south, as well as actually this community for 4 years in Liberty City and surrounding areas. My pathway into politics has a lot to do with my family, as many folks may know. My mother and father both served in the state legislature, but since I only get 2 minutes, really want to talk about the lady, my mom, because as we're discussing the film, you know, she was one of those crazy individuals who decided in the early 80s to try to run for a state house seat in a white male-dominated legislature, primarily because she didn't seek out permission first. And in doing so, birthed in her a desire to want to serve, and that ultimately trickled down to her children. But a lot of that was not just an innate desire to want to be in this place. What it was a real desire to want to change the status quo, because the status quo in 1984 for an African-American woman was you can't do it. Status quo in 1984 for an African-American woman is if you choose to do it, this can go a couple different ways for you, and one of those is death. So after receiving death threats, after having her children threatened and her life threatened, she was crazy enough to then run again and again until she won. And in 1992 became the first African-American woman to represent her House district. And so for that reason and for that legacy, that kick-started a life of service that has led me to the Miami-Dade County Public School System, to the state legislature, to the state senate, and now as the political director for the New Florida Majority.
Give it up for our panel. So for those of you that may not know me, or, you know, some people may tell you I do not like politicians, or that I'm generally antagonistic towards politicians. I want to tell you all from me that that is true. Yet and still, it would take a fool to not acknowledge the huge amount of labor and the burden it takes to run for office and then to legislate, and to try to stick to a platform that at all turns people do not want you to be successful. We've all heard the saying, they're our skin but not our kin. And we've had a number of black elected officials, Obama, who have been in office, but we don't feel have reflected a black consciousness or a true black politic. And so my first question for you all, which is the softball question, believe it or not, is what is black political leadership to you? What does it look like, and how do you feel you have reflected that in office?
6 a.m. until you just fall off to sleep. What do you mean by that? I probably am not your typical politician. I am a public servant. I started my adult career as a teacher, and I moved through the ranks, one time principal of the year. But the very people who thought that I should represent them, as you've heard earlier, might not have understood what the labor would be like, how intensive. I ran for the office of state representative, as I said earlier, as a principals don't run for office. Dwight will tell you teachers don't run for office. And it's not because they are at a point, thank you, they're at a point in their lives where they have become a little senile or crazy, but it's something that they see, as the mayor said, they could do to change. Well, part of my legacy reads the principal who hired parents at her school, and they'd never worked before. During the time that I was principal, there was what was considered great welfare. Why? Because each time you had a child, you got an extra $400 a month. Well, why work? Why work? Well, when this lady who says, you don't send your child to school, I'll come get them, takes off her heels and walks across the street and develop a relationship with the parents. So when the parents would come to the school and decide, I got to tell this teacher off, you know what I'm talking about. They would send for me to come to the room. Well, she's from the projects, so she can handle it. Well, I did. But as they learned to trust me when they would bring their children to school, they had to stay and help us educate their children. So as they moved forward, people were watching, as I said. You run for office. Again, I ran and I won. Well, they didn't understand that I couldn't go to Tallahassee and come back after a few months. Being the principal, who's going to run this school? Well, people ran the school before I got there. But the idea is, what does it mean? It means service. It's non-stop service. Quick story, then I'm going to pass the mic. Quick story. Just the day before yesterday, I got a call from someone that I don't even know. And she said, my sister is being held in Jackson Memorial in the crisis center, and she thinks you can come and get her. So I said, well, you know, I'm a school board member. I don't know if I can do that. Ms. Bendross, that's why we vote for you. You can do anything. I said, okay, let's see what I can do. Well, I found out that I did find this out, she's bipolar. And as soon as she got her meds, she was going to be okay. But that service to me. Who would call a school board member to go to the hospital and get their sister out if they didn't believe in you? That's what I do. I am not a politician. I went in knowing that I wouldn't be rich, and I'm going to come out knowing that I'm not going to be rich. But you will never see, I hope you want, my name across the front page of the Herald saying that she did something wrong. Integrity, courage, that's what it means to me. Thank you.
I think the first thing was I don't know. I don't know that I'm typical in any way. I'm not sure about that. I do know that I was raised by a Baptist preacher and a Seventh-day Adventist teacher. They're both real black. I got a lot of beatings when I was a kid. I grew up in Miami Gardens. And so I grew up knowing people who really, they've spent most of their lives in prison, but I've also grown up knowing people who were judges and lawyers and doctors. And so I understand the diversity of our community. How when people look at us, they see one color, but inside that color, a lot of different things, a lot of different talents. And I think I try to reflect that in the leadership, whether it's, Wells Fargo giving really crap loans to people in black neighborhoods. Well, I took $60 million out of Wells Fargo. I'm not going to beg you to do right. I'm just going to move my money. You know, when we ask our insurance carrier how many black lawyers you have to defend us, they tell us it's not our purview to do that. I hired an different insurance carrier. You know, I believe in the subtlety and the reality of policy. So a lot of times we get into protesting, and protesting is cool, but you need policy that's going to endure past the person if you want to actually try to affect systemic change. And so I spent a lot of time at her age just reading stuff. Just reading, like, why does this happen this way? So some things are predictable based on how things have to happen. Well, how do we affect this policy? One of the things that we're doing in the city now, I talked about it yesterday in the State of the City, is that I'm creating the Office of Civic Engagement. And eventually somebody's going to get mad about this, but we're going to register people to vote year-round. The city's going to do that. We're going to educate people about civics year-round. The city is going to do that. I'm going to take general fund money, and I'm going to create the most civically active city in the entire country. That's what I'm going to do. Because I am convinced that if they're scared enough, when we insist that things happen, they'll happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to answer this question a slightly different way since I'm not actually in office yet. I'm going to talk about just having a seat at the table. Part of another reason I ran for office was I got tired of begging people to do the right thing. And my role as deputy city attorney, it was to advise the city commission on how to vote, right? Do the legal research, here's your legal parameters. I take the extra step of saying, here's the impact on the community. But at the end of the day, it was their vote. Good for the community, bad for the community, corrupt, not corrupt. It was their decision to make. And what I've learned is in certain situations where people are making decisions about your lives all day long, sometimes they just don't have the benefit of somebody with your perspective at the table. And what I found at the city of North Miami Beach, for example, is because I was in the position of interim or deputy city attorney, I could weigh in before the damage was done. My mom has an expression she likes to say, which is prévenir c'est mieux que guérir, which translates to is prevention is better than cure. So because I could say, hey, this is going to have a disproportionate impact on this group of people or that group of people, because a lot of times what happens with structural racism or structural sexism is they're just not even thinking about you. They don't set out to actively, proactively discriminate against you or do something bad to you or whatever to your community. It's just that you're not even a thought. So it's important to have somebody at the table who has your interests in mind and understands the impact. So that's one. A concrete way that that happens, and you kind of heard a little bit about it in the movie, and you just heard Mayor Gilbert talk about it, is providing access. Another layer of structural racism is that people give opportunities to people who are in their circles. And a lot of times the people in their circles just don't happen to look like us because the people who are in their circles look like them. And unless you're them, it's not you, right? So one of the things that I tried to do, and when I first acted as interim city attorney, was to take a look at our bar of counsel and recognize that they were almost all white men. And I was like, no, we have plenty of competent other people. So I expanded it and got permission from the then council, now commission, to make sure we had competent African Americans, Haitian Americans, Hispanic Americans, women, at the table who could do the work, because before it was just a matter of who they happened to know that was there. So that's that.
Thank you.
So we can't really attack the question without thinking about the psychology of the person that we're talking about, right? So when someone aspires to run for public office, a lot of the characteristics of things like ambition, intelligence, you know, they check a lot of different boxes. But one thing that I've found in black elected leadership that I've even worked with is an unconscious desire for white validation. And let me break that down for some of the folks in the room, right? So in a world that is oppressive to black people, in a world that oftentimes marginalizes and kills African Americans for sport, for fun, for policy, you have people within that are saying that if I just get in the room, they'll love me more. They'll like me. And if they like me, then that's half the battle. And the problem is that once those folks get in the room, they're so busy trying to be liked and loved and adored by the people who are causing systemic racism that they become impotent to the ability to pass good policy to benefit their own communities, right? And so if we're going to be honest about the notion of what black political power looks like, it has to come from a place of being unapologetic about your blackness. It has to come from a place of being unapologetic about your blackness. And the reason I share this is because what ends up happening is in the political landscape of the United States, people get caught up with well, I want to be the representative of everyone. And what we fail to realize is that the black community has never had a representative in that context, right? So if we're not careful and very deliberate about wanting to make sure that we push the envelope to change and break down the structural barriers, to dismantle Jim Crow, to understand that we live in a society that is inherently racist, and that in order to become a full society and see the promise of this notion of what democracy looks like, we have to deconstruct those systems. And the person who represents and sits in those spaces has to be diligent in moving that direction forward, not only for the black community, but for the country as a whole. Okay. Because if we really believe that rising tides lift all boats, then you have to recognize that marginalized communities, the communities that are being gentrified or disproportionately policed or mass incarcerated, cannot exist if society is going to get better.
All right, thank you. Okay, so my first question is for the mayor. As you all know, in November we have the opportunity to elect the first black governor of the state of Florida, in Andrew Gillum. In the primary, Mayor, you endorsed Phillip Levine over the eventual nominee, Andrew Gillum, a fellow FAMUan, a black person, and a fellow mayor. Can you, I understand that there are a lot of political maneuvers that common folk may not understand, but can you explain what went into your decision to endorse Phillip Levine and how you thought it would be better for your constituents?
Philip's one of my best friends. I know him very well. I work with him down here. And I was really tired of supporting Democrats from Central and North Florida. They always lose. Andrew's going to be different. But just real talk, we support Democrats from the I-4 and from North Florida when the vast majority of Democratic voters are in South Florida. It is why Democrats lose statewide. Andrew can be different, but he can only be different if we all in this room do something that we have shown that we just generally don't do. Turn out at more than a 70% vote. That's what we have to do. I mean, that's just real talk. Sometimes and I don't mind the question, Philip, because we don't have this honest conversation among ourselves, but the only way Andrew can win, the only way, it's like drawing the perfect hand in spades or bid whist, where you're going to bid a no and you got all the aces and all the twos and you're going downtown, is if all of us vote. I don't just, from a structural perspective, when I look at how Democrats perform in the state of Florida, I thought Phillip had a better chance. And from an actual ideological perspective, Phillip and I are more similar. And I want to talk about that some too.
Well, real quick. You started off, my question was how it would be better for your constituents.
That's what I'm about
You
to talk
started
about
off
right
the
now.
response with Phillip Levine has been your friend. How did Phillip Levine's platform which
That is
how
exactly
did
what I'm
his-
about to get
yeah,
to,
yeah, yeah.
Phillip.
How did his platform serve the citizens of Miami Gardens or black people around the state? When as mayor, his policies and what he did resulted in black people being beat and attacked and arrested every Memorial Day on the beach. He hasn't shown himself to be an efficient leader and have policy and practice match. So
Can I just make an observation or something? So that's actually fundamentally not true. That's just not true.
What part of it?
No, hold on.
Yeah.
And virtually all of it. Like a great example is Phil was one of the first mayors to actually decriminalize marijuana. Essentially, hold
people
on,
have
hold
a
on.
choice.
Hold
The
on.
officers have a choice.
Hold on.
No, we're talking facts.
No.
The officers have a choice
But Phillip,
as to whether they can arrest.
Phillip, my assumption is when you ask a question, you want me to answer it.
No, my
My assumption is you want me to answer it.
My assumption is when the answer is given that it'll be true.
Well, okay,
so
hold on. So let me actually get a question out because we can move everybody off the stage and have a debate about ideology. I ain't got a problem with that.
Yeah.
But let's be clear about something. So when you look at ideology, there's this idea from the far left that we all think alike. I tell people all the time I'm a Democrat. I am a moderate Democrat. Any Miami Gardens residents in the room? You all know that, right? You all know my focus is purely economic development, right? You know that I believe that we use economic development to cure crime, right? You know I believe in hiring black officers, so I send them to an academy, right? Those are the things that Phillip supported. So when I know somebody, I actually know him. I know that when we talk about business, a lot of times people want to talk about social issues. He's talking about, hey, he didn't tell me what was wrong with the communities. He came and said, hey, what do you all think we can do to meaningfully change the communities? I appreciate that type of inclusion. I appreciate the type of friendship. The reason why Phillip Levine and I are friends is because of his views. I don't have friends that think badly of us. We don't get down like that. And let me just say this, and I appreciate, and I think that I probably talked to Andrew the night of the debate, and I talked to him before then too, and the night of the primaries. We're doing something as Democrats now that fundamentally will also lose us the election. I've seen it on Facebook over and over again where people who supported Andrew before the primary are antagonistic towards people who were Democrats but supported a Democrat other than Andrew. Fundamentally, we literally need every Democrat plus some to win. So, and this wouldn't just be to you, Phillip, but to everyone else.
We get it.
If we're going to have this conversation, honestly, as Democrats with regard to politics, understand this. The idea of a sore winner in the primary is ridiculous. Cut it out. Let's unite. Let's actually elect Andrew Gilbert. Can we do that?
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely. So my second question is for you, Doctor. So to educate everyone, in November we have the opportunity in Miami-Dade on Referendum 362 to increase the sales tax for 75 cents per $1,000 so that additional monies can be given to teacher raises, to counselor raises, and for school safety. I can't tell you how to vote on it, but teacher raises, you get it. And also school safety. We have an opportunity post that to ensure and to debate over whether those funds go to teacher raises and counselors rather than more money going to police officers. What we found is no matter if the police officers are black, I never had a black police officer, that was dope, but whether they're black or what, our schools are already over-policed, and the state has already put considerable monies into adding police officers in schools post-Parkland. Can you make a commitment to fight for that money to go to teacher raises and to more counselors and not just to more police officers?
You know, that's a one-word answer, and it's yes. Let me tell you something. Having been in Tallahassee for 8 years, the mayor being with me, every year I have supported and brought forth legislation brought forth a bill that sometimes did not even get heard, and it was about just what we're talking about now. Things have not changed drastically. I remember a time when we wouldn't even think about talking about asking someone to raise their taxes. But Tallahassee has not done its job. We have had to fight every step of the way to get what we got. Look at the list and see where we rank in terms of teachers' pay. We know for a fact we live in a place that's called paradise, and it is for some people. But not for a pittance of a salary. And don't even think that the school board members make a lot of money, because they don't. But many of the school board members, or just as the teachers, they are members of the board and they have real jobs. They have real jobs. But to answer your question, I was very succinct in my answer. We need more counselors. Teachers are not paid decent wages. They can't even afford to stay here. They're running away so that they can live a decent life. I never forget my dad, who was a builder. I lived in Augusta, Georgia, Fort Gordon. We are a military family. And he came to the house and he said, "Baby, you couldn't afford this house in Miami." Well, he was right. I'm a teacher. So to answer your question, yes, for sure. Nonstop, every day. We will be back in session for committee, and then we'll go on to board meeting, and we will vote the right way to let teachers know that they have worth, they have value. We will get it done. Thank you.
Yep. Sure.
It's interesting. We do need to pay teachers more, and I'm supporting the item. But we need to really be mindful of what Tallahassee did.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they put money into it, but not enough to actually cover the schools. So
Yep.
when you're in a small city and you have one school, that's fine. When you're Miami Gardens, it's different.
Mm-hmm.
So either the school board will have to put police officers there because of state statute, or cities will have to do it,
Mhm.
or the county will have to do it. But so they didn't give us enough money to actually put an officer at every school. And there's really no indication that the officer at the school would actually stop this anyway.
Right. Right.
Because there was an officer at the school.
Yeah.
But there was an officer at the school. But let's just be clear that somewhere along the line, if we put all of the money into teachers and counselors and psychiatrists and psychologists, quite frankly,
Yep.
also in
Yep.
schools, at some point, somebody else is going to raise taxes.
Yep.
It's either going to be a city, or it's going to be the state, or it's going to be the county. But police officers are literally the most expensive municipal employee.
Yep.
So somebody's going to have to do that. So
So-
we need that it really needs to be changed. The
Mhm.
law needs to be changed.
So we're being educated here. Do you all understand what's going on? After Parkland, Tallahassee voted on a measure, unfunded, to increase the presence of police officers in our schools under the auspices that more police officers would decrease crime. We've seen they have been wholly ineffective at that. Still, it is now into law. And so cities are going to have to come to grips with an unfunded mandate about how they pay for additional police. And so that's why it's so important that we pay attention to what's going on in Tallahassee. We, for many years, have had a Republican trifecta in House, Senate, and the governor's office, and the whole clemency board as well. And so we have an opportunity in November to start off in the right place and start to reverse some of this. And thank you for your commitment on that.
Can I add one last comment on the education front right quick?
No, I'm sorry.
Well, you let him do it.
You fucking shit. You're right. You're right. You're absolutely
I'm
right.
just saying.
Yes. It's all the rails are broken. This is,
All right, I'm going to be real quick.
no, go ahead, please.
In terms of accountability, all skin folk and kinfolk, which is what you alluded to earlier, the only reason we even have to address that is because it didn't happen in Tallahassee. Part of it is because of that trifecta. The person that I beat was the only Democrat that voted with the Republicans on that crazy education bill. because they thought they were getting something in exchange. And they didn't, really. So I'm just going to put that out there. But we need to hold people accountable. Sometimes, as the politician, you have to decide, are you just going to go down fighting, especially going into the House, which Democrats are in the minority, probably can't get a whole lot done anyway unless you work across the aisle some kind of way. So that's one level. Second thing about what's going on in Tallahassee, if you're not paying attention, is separate and apart from just the emasculation of schools, public schools, there is also what's going on with how they're disproportionately funding what's going on in Miami-Dade County versus other parts. We're basically a donor area right now. We're not getting our fair share of taxes, and that's something that both Republicans and Democrats in Miami-Dade County should be able to fix if we get it together. But that requires us to keep them accountable. Same thing with the school board. Those monies are there, but we need to keep them accountable. When I say that, the Carvalho had insisted that he was going to commit 80% to just teacher salaries and those things as opposed to police officers.
Yep.
So we need to remember to hold their feet to the fire if that doesn't happen.
Yep.
That's all I was going to throw in.
Yeah, I'm coming to you anyway. You can keep
Sure.
it. So, as you mentioned, you just beat an incumbent, Roy Hardiman, in this year's primary. You're going up against a Libertarian, and for all intents and purposes, if all goes well, as it should, you will be serving your community in Tallahassee. Your district covers both some fairly affluent areas or upper middle class areas, and some areas like Liberty City and Little Haiti, which by some measures will be called impoverished areas to some. These areas also are some of the most gentrified and fastest gentrified neighborhoods in the city of Miami. Little Haiti is about to become home to a Magic City development. Liberty Square is rising, and they want other floors. And we've witnessed over and over that when development happens, it's accompanied by increased policing and displacement. So the development happens, new things are brought in, and the people who have lived in these communities are no longer welcome or can no longer afford to live or be or play in those areas. They can work there, they can serve in the back of the house, but they are not allowed or not able to afford to live there. What will you do in your role to make sure that Little Haiti maintains its demographic makeup? We're able to fight back against developers whose preferred demographic makeup are South Americans, European tourists, and other folks.
So you want the real answer or the politically, nice to say answer?
The real one.
Okay. So the real answer, as a state representative, my purview would really have, no real impact on that. That's something that mostly happens at the local government level. And a lot of those ships have already sailed. However, so that's the real answer. It's not the nice answer. It's the true answer. That being said, I'm not one to just kind of stay at, it's not my job kind of thing. There are lots of things that other communities have done, and we can still push for certain measures, but we have to differentiate between two groups of people being displaced. One is homeowners or business owners who actually own property versus those who are renting, right? Because they don't have the same standing. So let's talk about the homeowners first. So for those, there are two ways we could look at it, and then that falls in a larger, that whole discussion falls in a larger context of affordable housing that we just have a crazy crisis on. But let's talk about this part first. So for homeowners, it's your right to sell your home if you want to sell your home. If you've had it for 30 years and you feel like you can get $500,000 on it and then you can buy yourself a little condo, who am I to tell you, no, you need to stay there because X, Y, and Z? That's not my place, right? However, we can create opportunities where people, instead of just selling off their whole wealth, because in our communities, that's a lot of where our wealth lies, and that generational wealth, once you sell it, is gone. We can create incentives whereby in these developments, people can continue to have a share of whatever the profits are, and there have been developers who have done that before. Unfortunately, Miami-Dade County has not taken much interest in those kinds of developments. We can reintroduce them so that that can be an option. So that's for that group. For the renters, we really just need to deal with the affordable housing crisis, right? And where we're going to put people and where we're going to create people. And that's something that has to happen both on the state level in terms of funding and creating initiatives and studies to see how we're going to address it. Because what happens is that Republican trifecta you were just talking about don't get it. And they think affordable housing is not an issue. So those funds are regularly swept into the general fund and spent on other things. When we know down here that it is an issue, right? So, but that's not just in Tallahassee. That's also happening down here, where they're sitting here playing around, and there are really basic things that we could do, like create some permanent affordable housing or rent control or all kinds of measures that could happen. We need to have the laws in the state level so that it can happen at the local level, but there are things that can be done. We just need to have the courage to do it.
Thank you. And so, Dwight, you've served kind of on both sides now in this burgeoning Black political power movement, and currently in your capacity with New Florida Majority as their political director, you're tasked with moving a Black political agenda, possibly by some measures on the other side, not in office, working quote unquote outside of the system. Wearing those two hats, what is a vision forward do you see for people in this room to engage in a strategic or in a strategy that allows us to have real material benefits for our communities and to build political power?
So it's a very technical,
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
No,
I know it's
no.
a very technical question, and I'm really trying to process this in the most responsible way. People have to realize their own power first off, right? And it kills me when people diminish their abilities as an individual to make change, right? Because if you're an individual who now dismisses your ability to make change, that means that you can't join forces with other individuals to actually make permanent change happen, right? So we understand the importance of elections. Do we also understand the importance of pushing policy, being creative when we push policy, making people understand that if they don't push the policy that we deserve, that we ultimately need to vote them out of office? Because what ends up happening is people become very jaded at the idea that they can influence a system that has taken advantage of them for as long as it has. And so what I'm asking, my pitch to the folks here is, and it's really a rhetorical question, do you know your power? See, that I don't know, that uncertainty is part of the problem. Because until you discover your ability to move things, nothing's going to change. And what's going to happen is folks are going to get in office, folks are going to feel less compelled, folks are going to feel weak, inability to engage. And so I'm asking you, if you don't know your own power, to discover your own power. Two of my colleagues just popped back in. The New Florida Majority is always willing to help give you and provide you tools to help move people. Because here's what we understand and have to believe fundamentally, that if people are not working on our behalf, both inside and outside the political space, then those folks need to be moved, or their minds need to be changed. And if you don't have the ability to change minds, then you've dismissed yourself. I'm going to give you one simple quote, and I'm going to shut up. Charles Hamilton Houston, former dean of Howard University, said of lawyers, but I think it applies to everybody in this room, either you are a social architect or you are a social parasite. There is no in between. There is no waffle. If you're not going to contribute to the betterment of society in some formidable way, you are a parasite and thus of no service. Everyone in here, in this room, has the ability to be a social architect, an instrument for change. And I would encourage everybody in here, if you don't know your own power, to join us at the New Florida Majority and discover at least some semblance of what your power is.
Thank you. Now we're going to open it up to questions.
Little Havana being gentrified. Overtown is being gentrified. I don't see the pastors. What's going to happen? Are you guys going to get the community together?
Got the question. So What are we going to do? Our communities are under fire. Okay.
Well, here's the thing. If we believe in an inside-outside strategy, what you have here is elected officials. What you have here is community activists, right? So it really boils down to what side of the fence you need to get on, but I think for the individual, you can be on both sides of it. You know, are you engaging your politicians in a responsible way with an idea on how to create that unity, how to create that structure? More importantly, are you galvanizing other folks around you? So again, I'll make the pitch. You're welcome to come by. Let's start having that conversation and start building that coalition that you're looking for.
Hold on. Let me give you all a real quick understanding about what gentrification actually is, though. So, because in some respects, what happens down here in Overtown, when you have large land masses that are sold off by owners and they displace people, that's gentrification. When you choose individually to sell your house, it isn't. It isn't. Let's just be clear, because I get the question about gentrification a lot of times in Miami Gardens, and we're still basically the same percentages we've always been, but Miami Gardens has a higher home ownership rate than the county. So for Miami Gardens to be gentrified, everyone has to choose to sell their homes. We need to actually believe in ourselves in a way, in the places where we are, that people, look, if you undervalue where you are, and they overvalue where you are, that formula does not work for you. If you are a homeowner, because you will sell for something that you think is good, it won't be good.
Okay.
One of the ways we can deal with gentrification, the perceived gentrification and displacement, is build where you are. Stop moving across the tracks.
We have a question here.
Can the amendments be written in a more simple language where you did not bundle 3 and 4 items together? Because sometimes it's confusing when you think you're voting for, say, higher taxes or teachers' wages or any single item. Some of the other things that are bundled in those questions are a no.
You're absolutely right. There are 7 illogical, compact, thrown together amendments by what is called the Constitutional Revision Commission. And they were intentionally written that way, to confuse you, And the thing that we have to understand for people who are, again, the most marginalized is when you end up going in with a lack of understanding, the people who've written those are hoping that you'll trust them enough to vote yes and empower them more. So we're talking about private industry folks who've written this. We're talking about lobbyists who've chimed in on this. We're talking about folks who are trying to make money off of the backs of black and brown bodies, putting together amendments that really don't make sense. So I'm not going to tell you how to vote, but I'm going to tell you that a no vote means that you don't give them that power.
The answer to the amendments that you asked is to get a governor who actually appoints Supreme Court justices, so when the amendments come that are clearly confusing. Look, I'm not just a lawyer, I was a good lawyer. Some of those amendments are just really confusing. They're meant to be confusing. The Supreme Court should have kicked them back. They should have said that. We need a governor to appoint Supreme Court justice to do that. We can only do that if we win. We get concentrated so much in the small differences within our party that we don't really pay attention to the huge differences between the people who are in charge and the ideas that we bring forward. I think Andrew, with regard to education, healthcare, business development, I think he is the person if we've never had a choice before, it's not close this time. Ron DeSantis is not a good public servant, period. You know this because his commercials don't talk about policy, they talk about Andrew. If he were a good public servant, he'd be telling you how he was going to get you out of an emergency room into a doctor's office. He would be telling you how he was going to help you transition from an economy that was to an economy that will be. He's not talking about that. He's talking about Andrew. And if we just pay attention, he doesn't care about the state of these people. He cares about winning. We need to care about winning, too, and we need to come together to win.
Okay. Does anyone else want to respond to that?
We also have to remember to pay attention to what millennials are talking about. Truth be told, you know, the Democratic establishment, by and large, has turned a deaf ear to certain things that are simple. And we're not talking about tuition-free college all the time, or necessarily Medicare for all, but just real innate policy that are disproportionately impacting people, young people, and especially young people of color. Like, can we talk about national marijuana legalization for a second? Can we talk about ending mass incarceration in a responsible way? Can we talk about health care that isn't going to break the bank? You know, people are, you know, everyone assumes millennials are asking for the world. They're asking for like 5 things that folks aren't talking about in a very real way. They're like, we have to wait on that. And I'll use our own Democrats as an example. When we're sitting there trying to push for Medicare for all and ask people to just aspire to that in the future, you have Democrats who are running for office right now who are like, well, we got to tinker with the system. Listen, we're not asking you to tell us what you're going to do in the immediate. We understand the understanding of a low-hanging fruit. But when Kennedy gets up in 1960 and says we're going to go to the moon, understand that 3 years later he's dead, and we didn't get there till 6 years after the fact. So he would have been through both his terms before we get to the moon. And all I'm saying is we've lost our way as a party when we can no longer dream of a better world. And right now, we're in a world in peril where scientists are saying icebergs are melting, we're getting all these kinds of things, and no one's talking about a future that includes millennials.
You have to show up and you have to vote, and we actually need your vote. Listen, y'all, this is the thing. This is close, but it matters a lot. It doesn't just matter because we're electing the first black governor. That's not why this matters. It matters because there are people who actually want to keep their health care. It matters because teachers really are moving out of the state. It matters because we're not a forward-looking state right now. It actually matters. And sometimes you don't think you're, I don't agree literally with anyone 100% ideologically. I don't even look to. I look to whether I actually can follow your values. Do you value the things and the people that I value? Then that's the base level of the conversation. Find the person who best reflects those values. You don't have to agree with them on everything and cast a vote. And that's Andrew Gillum. That's Andrew Gillum. I know we're not supposed to advocate, but that's because you all can't advocate. I can say what I want to say. And yes, felons do need the right to vote. And they don't just need the right to vote, they need the right to hold state licenses so that they can actually get jobs. And we need the Department of Corrections to actually correct and not just punish. There's a lot of other things that we need. And it only happens if we actually change the balance of power in the state. We got to change the balance of power in the state.
So first of all, round of applause for the awesome organizers of this event. Woo! I think the moderator was going to do that, but he had an emergency and had to leave, so, you know, apologies on his behalf. I mean, I really don't know how to say it any plainer. Like, I think most of the people in this room understand on some level how important voting is. Is there anybody in this room, for real? You don't have to raise it actually, but like raise it in your heart. Are you thinking of not voting? Because here's what's going to happen. If we vote in the exact same numbers that we voted in the primary, if you add up all the votes of who voted for governor in the Republican side and the Democrat side, we lose. And we lose big. I don't know about y'all, but I don't like losing. Okay? And this internal firing squad we have going in the Democratic Party, I recently became first vice chair about a year ago, and I get a front row seat to all the crazy drama. And we need to get to the point where we're about getting stuff done instead of just talking about stuff. And we can get stuff done. And if you look at how Republicans do, for example, case in point, the Kavanaugh confirmation, like, what are we doing? So we need to get to the point where we've identified better, not perfect, but better and get it done, because the alternative is what we're living through now. Do you understand that we're in the most unique time in history that people have lived through in generations? We're one tweet away from war all day. Some people are one emergency visit away from death. When I tell you need to vote in this election like your life depends on it, I mean that. Whether you're talking about the disproportionate impact on communities of color by stand your ground laws, or whether you're talking about the lack of affordable health care and this dude telling you to just go to the emergency room, like for real, y'all? Like, is this even a discussion? So I'm just gonna take it for granted that the people in this room understand the importance of what we're talking about. And I'm gonna ask you to take a moment today, this weekend, whenever, and figure out what can you do to be a social architect and get some stuff done with this election. Because we need to do more. We need to do more. I'm done. Here.
Thank you. Thank you.
So as an elected official and a school teacher, I've given more than my fair share of glass half full commentary. I'm just gonna be real with y'all. I'm gonna be the pessimist for the first time in a long time. I'm scared. I'm scared because for 41 years of my life, I've sat back and fundamentally believed that if I believed enough in the wills and desires of people to do right, that they would do right. And what I've discovered in 41 years is that some people just don't give a damn about a lot of things, and that's unfortunate. But I also know that some of those people that don't give a damn because they've been through it. So let's talk for a second. Let's be real for a second. We can talk about Liberty Square and displacement. You have people who live in Liberty Square that have been there for 5 generations. And we could sit here and point the finger and say that that's their fault. Or we can acknowledge that there's a system that benefits on keeping people impoverished. Now, if you are okay with that, I'm assuming you wouldn't have come to see this. But if you believe in fundamental change and your abilities as a change agent, then you have to do something. And I want to note one of the most powerful parts in the film is when the 3 mothers whose children had been murdered showed up to the mayor's office to hold them accountable. I want you to think about this. The pain that they've went through of losing their children got them to engage in the process. They didn't say anything about I voted for Maynard or Maynard was my guy. They said that I had a problem and I went to the seat of power to get that dealt with. So when I asked you the question, do you know your power? That's what you should have reflected on. The ability that in times of peril we can do anything. And I say that because my grandfather's grandfather didn't have the right to exist in this country. Exist. My grandfather, despite fighting in World War II, came home to a segregated place in South Carolina and yet still had the audacity, was crazy enough to try and raise a family in the midst of that chaos, but he did it. We've always protested. As people of color, or people of goodwill, we've been committed to being change agents for a better world. So I'm not going to sit here and blow you up about how voting is great, because you're right. Sometimes the people that get elected suck bad. But my question to you is, if you felt that your ultimate protest was just a vote, then you failed to understand the basis of a participatory democracy. You all owe it to not only yourselves, but to my grandfather's grandfather, to not sit back and complain, but to get off your asses, put your hand to the plow, and make the country better. And I'm going to take my last breath trying to do that. So I suggest you join me in the struggle. Thank you.
Good. I need y'all to vote Democrat up and down the ticket, from Andrew Gillum, Sean Shaw, Bill Nelson. Everywhere you see that dim, just go ahead and bubble it in. If you would like to volunteer, You can sign up with her either to go knocking on doors, make phone calls, and if you want to volunteer on election day, you could just holler at me afterwards. So that was the only thing out. So if you want to engage, please do that. DottieJoseph.com, contribute, like, share, Facebook,
Yes.
Instagram.
Dr. Mindingall, take it. Oh.
And if you just want to contribute some money, the link for Andrew's campaign is on my page. Money helps.
Thank you, Mayor. Dr. Mindingall, take us out with some words.
I have challenged all of my schools. I represent 65 schools, and they're all pretty much in the inner city. So I challenged all of my schools to put together a PTA. Every school should have one. Why? Because parents have power. So I challenge you to love the children enough to come to the school board and speak on their behalf. The question that I was asked earlier, will you promise to vote, pardon me, for teachers' pay? With all my heart, thank you. He's still taking care of me. Making sure that if you don't come, make sure that if you don't come to the school board, nothing changes. Excuse me. There are 9 of us on the board. 9. Someone mentioned holding the superintendent's feet to the fire. He is not our boss. We are his bosses. So he doesn't get a vote. He doesn't get to make changes. We make them. Hold our feet to the fire. We're going to make it happen down there for the teachers, mainly because everyone in this room should thank a teacher. Thank you for coming out. God bless you.